Hey all, here OS Reviews. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at the MemoryCube. This is an interesting 10.1-inch 3D digital photo frame that is essentially using a parallax layer on the display, similar to something like the Nintendo 3DS or the HTC Evo 3D smartphone from many years back, but on a much larger panel, so hopefully it feels a little more immersive, and it is technically containing the guts of something like an Android tablet, including both Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth 5, and you're able to wirelessly send photos over to it. It's also able to convert regular 2D images into 3D, as well as generate new pieces of art that you can convert into a watercolor, an oil pastel painting effect, so on and so forth. It does have a 4,000 mAh capacity battery inside as well, so it doesn't have to be plugged in 24/7 if you're just trying to move it around in your office space. It has built-in speakers that you can use as a bedside white noise sound machine for some additional added functionality. So as this continues to play back here, I'll mention that it's currently a product that you can find on Kickstarter, the early bird price of around $250. So in recap, it's a combination of that display being a little bit more special, plus the fact that you have some more customization and editing tools available through their app. That is the selling point of this device. Now it also comes in 64 or 128GB capacity versions, and the display's resolution natively is 1080p. However, keep in mind, like most 3D display products, technically the resolution that you're seeing in 3D is going to be roughly halved. Plus, if there are different planes, for example, in a display like this where you can actually still see the 3D effect as you're slightly shifting around, the more angles and views that the display has further divides the native resolution. Of course, when you're looking at 2D images, then in those modes, of course, it will still be at the full HD res, just something to keep in mind. We'll take a closer look at the display later in this video and see how the clarity stacks up in reality. So the packaging here is pretty ornate, maybe because they know it's the holiday shopping season. It actually comes in a pretty fancy or posh looking carrying bag, and so if you're giving it as a gift idea, it might be something to consider. So inside here we have, of course, the actual main box for the display, and also we have another separate smaller box for the optional frame that you can attach on the outside. And it's actually crafted out of a translucent acrylic material. And as for the actual frame itself, we can see it just comes in this white color at the moment. We have just a quick user guide, as well as for charging, it is using a magnetic pogo wire, as you can see here, kind of similar to smartwatches and MacBook chargers. So if you accidentally tug on the cable, it's not going to send the entire thing falling, which is neat. And there's also a little silicone sleeve that you can attach over the kickstand on the back of the frame, so that when you are popping it onto a table, it doesn't get scuffed up, and add some more resistance and grip as another little accessory, which is pretty thoughtful. The actual frame itself has kind of an interesting texture going on to the back plate. It reminds me of a feather-like pattern, and the kickstand feels relatively stiff. You can position it at a couple of different angles, and it's able to still hold its position, as you can see there, a little bit further up or a little bit more backwards, all the way into an angle that looks something like this. The frame itself is otherwise crafted out of a polycarbonate plastic. We have stereo speakers at the very bottom. Then on the right-hand spine, you have a power key along with a volume rocker, in addition to a Type-C port to be used for data transfer. Long holding on the power key here to turn it on. The front here also looks like there is a webcam. But my understanding is that instead of being used to take photos or selfies as well as video conferencing, it's instead used to track your relative position as you're looking at the screen to give you a slightly better 3D effect. The UI here, as you can tell, is heavily customized to give you the core digital photo frame experience. It is a touchscreen, of course, an IPS LCD panel otherwise, with pretty decent viewing angles, of course mostly designed to be used indoors, so the brightness I think is generally quite satisfactory. It is a glossy panel though, so just keep that in mind. As for the 3D layer in the display stack, it creates kind of an interesting, almost rainbow-like shimmer if you're tilting it at the light just right, but generally speaking, it doesn't feel that different looking at it in the normal 2D mode from a typical phone or tablet. But yeah, as we saw during the boot up experience, it's technically running on Android underneath the hood. It's just you can't really access the normal Android apps, locking it down to give you a faster experience on just playing back photos, at least in normal use without rooting or hacking it, but it is technically kind of a 10.1-inch Android tablet, which we can also verify when jumping into the more advanced system settings, as you can see here, including the Android build is also going to be displayed. But yeah, we can also see that the Android operating system does take up a little bit of storage space. So the 64GB version that we have here, we have around 46GB free out of the box. Now, one hardware feature that I would have liked to see though would have been a micro SD card slot as a way to augment or expand the built-in storage, which I do find to be a little bit of a curious omission. So do pick the capacity that that you need when you are picking one up. And we can see here that the battery capacity when it comes to screen on time can last you around, I would say, 5 or 6 hours or so. Again, it's a feature that technically we don't really see in all of the photo frames on the market, being able to use it in this detached mode. Now, before we take a closer look at all of the UI features, let's also briefly snap on the optional acrylic case, and giving it a light push actually reminds me of some of the retro Macintosh computers from back in the day, the iMacs, which also had this acrylic plastic shell, if you guys remember, kind of like it's suspended in a block of ice, again similar to that Apple aesthetic from back in the day. As well as the speaker grills, in addition to the power keys on the side, can still be accessed using a cutout. Now we can tap on some of the widgets on the very top here to jump into some of the quick settings. The first one here is going to be just a desk clock mode. Now, like most 3D products, the effect is a little bit hard to capture completely on camera without kind of moving it around like this. You get a slight sense of that perspective shifting just because it is stereoscopic 3D, and of course we have only one lens, or a mono lens, on the camera compared to two eyes in person. So the effect being filmed is kind of like looking at a 3D screen with only one eye, the other eye being covered up, aka still looking kind of 2D. So in person, it does feel like the alarm clock is kind of reaching on the inside, with some of the characters standing a little bit further back. Aside from the widget, we can also jump into the clock by tapping here and find other options for the 3D clock. For example, this one here also looks pretty neat, and instead has a more simplified blue analog clock, seem to be floating above the display, kind of coming out of the screen. You can also see the focal planes there kind of shift. So it's not only showing 3D at this one fixed angle, I can confirm that if I'm looking at it slightly off axes, I can still see the 3D effect. So the viewing angle has been improved compared to the original Nintendo 3DS, for example. Now, that being said, as we mentioned before, because every single angle that you're adding into the 3D display further cuts the resolution by 2, and so it still isn't going to be a perfectly super smooth animation. As I'm looking at it from every single angle, you can still see some jumps as it is crossing between the different focal planes. If it was perfectly smooth, something like 180 planes, then the resolution of course would drop even lower. So it is a bit of a compromise between higher sharpness versus smoother shifting of perspectives in 3D. They're mostly all simulating analog displays. You can see the shadows also start to change. I really like this one, in fact, giving that sense of depth as you're looking at it from different angles. This one is very floral, with some of the flowers as well as objects here seeming to jump out at you, as you can see there, also looking pretty neat. You can still see it from, again, slightly more extreme angles. But you can also choose a 2D display mode, which has instead analog options, such as this retro flip style clock. This one here also gives it a retro futuristic vibe with the flipping animations of the second hand. And here's one more which is inspired by Mario in this 8-bit format, also looking quite neat. So this is just the typical display mode. You can have it plugged in and just use it as a desk clock. And hopefully in a future software update, I would like to see them have additional options for more dials that you can download, similar to on a smartwatch. Now for 3D Haven, this is the part where you can find some nature sound effects for relaxation, drifting off to sleep, and cranking up the volume here. That's going to be the sound. And you can also see the time information as well as some weather status on the very top. In fact, it seems to loop through some different footage. It's still going to be shown in the 3D mode. So as I'm slightly shifting it around, you get that sense of depth. Flames seeming to jump out a little bit more compared to the beach and the ocean falling off into the distance. Here's another one with the sunset, also is pretty dramatic, as you can tell there. So not bad in terms of the overall effect. Here's one more, which is reminiscent of, honestly, the wallpaper on the classic Google Pixel phones, including the Pixel 1, the Pixel 2 devices. Some more beachscapes that you can find with ocean sounds, also loops through gently there. Color and contrast of this display is honestly not bad for an IPS panel. Next one over here is going to be some birds and nature sounds of chiming from a rainforest, also looking quite convincing with the bird there kind of jumping out to you versus the background there, which is a little bit further away. Here's another one of the bird on a cherry blossom tree, also looking quite beautiful, I have to say. This one is going to be a gentle rainfall, and we can see the leaves here with the water droplets seeming to stretch out of the display, as well as the background there with the bouquet seeming to fall off a little bit more, also quite relaxing and calming. This one is going to be a thunderstorm, much more dramatic with lightning striking behind the clouds. This one is going to be a wind chime using a glass ornament there, and we can also see it again pop off a little bit more. Now, since it does have the guts of an Android tablet essentially, it features an accelerometer inside as well. This one is going to be a waterfall, also very serene. The water seeming to pop off a little bit more here in the front versus the distance. And then last but not least, this one is kind of a starry sky with crickets chirping there in the background, also very peaceful. Now we can also tap on the gear icon here for it to loop after X minutes and then turn off, for example, after 1 hour of playing, as you then drift off into sleep. So that is going to be the white noise sound effect under the 3D Haven tab. Now going into the most prominent 3D AI album, it's sorted by galleries and collection. Collections are going to be images you send over from the app that we'll see in a moment, versus gallery are the photos built into the storage of the frame already. So we can see this one of a race car. It's actually quite dramatic, kind of popping off from the screen. And now we should be able to activate the accelerometer. It will indeed flip over after a second. And the 3D effect, I can verify, still seems to function. We can swipe left and right to go through the other images. This one here of stone statues, historical site in ancient China, also has a pretty convincing effect. Another one of an ancient, it looks like jade cup, jade Buddha. These adorable kittens here also seem to give it a more lively pop as I'm looking in terms of the perspective. Another kind of jewelry piece that does look quite convincing. Here's an example of what humans or portraits might look like. Another pet example of a dog that does look quite convincing, the nose kind of sticking out a little bit more there. And some more flower and plant examples here as well. Here's a cityscape that might be a little bit more of a sensory overload, but you can see a bit of depth here with the buildings. So you get the idea. Overall, definitely not bad in terms of the 3D effect on this slightly larger display that we can interact with. Here's an example of an oil painting artwork that's also looking pretty neat. So generally speaking, as we've mentioned earlier, even though to get this effect, they are reducing the resolution by the number of focal planes, I would say general sharpness is still a little bit better than I was honestly expecting. Sure, if you're looking super closely, you can definitely tell a little bit more pixelation compared to the normal 2D mode, which looks the sharpest, but it's not like it's a blurry mess or anything like that. For the most part, details are still visible from just a couple of inches away for it to be a pretty decent photo frame experience. This one here of a grape tree vineyard also is perhaps one of my favorites, looking quite beautiful, as well as another busy street there on a rainy day. Opening up the 3D Frame app, we can tap to link the frame, and we can also take a moment to see that under the device settings, aside from linking as well as general Wi-Fi connectivity, you can also take a look at the screensaver type. So for example, when it times out after a couple of seconds, it can display the weather information, the clock, album, or calendar views. And this is what that calendar view looks like for the screensaver. As well as the 3D weather view will look something like this. It's going to be dynamic based on your environment. And also, yes, this is a 3D weather mode. So as you are looking at it, it does have a sense of depth with the clouds kind of billowing there in the background. And so this will change based on your current weather. If it's raining, you're going to see rain instead. So over from the app, I've selected 9 photos, which by the way is the maximum number of files you can send in a single batch. And so uploading regular 2D photos and videos works pretty much like any other Framio or wireless digital photo frame. So jumping into the folder over here, we can now see the file loaded over. We can tap on this video file just as an example, working as advertised. Although it does take a couple of seconds if you're uploading a video file, larger files in general, to be passed over to the cloud to the frame. And here's a regular photo that we've also uploaded over, and some images here that we can jump into. Again, looking pretty nice in terms of the general display quality in the 2D mode, although it seems like we don't have pinch to zoom activated in the normal photo frame mode. And the stand, by the way, if you have the rubber stopper attached, can also be used in the portrait orientation as well, as you can see, again with relatively good colors, contrast, and details. The tab on the bottom here is a little bit more unique would be the Magic 3D. This can convert 2D images into 3D. So I'm going to select this iPhone photo. We can also crop it. You can also batch process up to 9 photos simultaneously, and we can tap on Start. And apparently the conversion is now done. Tapping on it, I can indeed confirm that this is now a 3D photo. As you can see, there is a real sense of depth. Definitely feels like the phone is kind of popping off of the screen, at least in the camera portion, versus the back of the iPhone is a little bit more recessed further back on the desk. So the conversion is actually working quite well as long as you have a decent foreground and subject separation. For example, if you're taking a photo of a wall and everything is completely flat, then it's not going to convert super well. But if you have something which is a little bit closer versus further away from the camera, it's going to work best in the 3D mode. And here's 2 other converted results. This one's more of a landscape shot of a snowy day here with a tree. Some of the branches seeming to stick out a little bit further from the screen versus the background there. Here's also a garden shot of a pot that seems to also stick out a little bit more compared to the background, as you can tell there. So it does have a pretty decent effect actually in successfully converting these 2D images into 3D. Looking pretty nice, I have to say. And then the third tab is AI 3D, which is similar to a large language model like Gemini or ChatGPT, where you can prompt it to generate a 3D image, as well as edit existing photos to apply a certain type of look, kind of like a filter, or if you want it to be more futuristic, retro in look, hairstyle changes, even age changes, fixing old photos with additional prompting. Kind of a neat idea, and after you apply those changes, you can push the photo over to the frame. So just using the templates for now, here's a photo of a cute squirrel on a fence. We can apply something like a Ghibli style, for example, and start the conversion. And here's the finished result. So it's made it kind of a 2D cartoon animation for the squirrel, rather cute, and also made the background a little more colorful as well, bringing up the contrast. So we can tap on save on your device's storage or onto the frame. In fact, let's actually tap on generate as a 3D copy as well as 2D, and then send it over. Also, by the way, yes, you can also convert 2D videos into 3D as well, using the same Magic 3D tab we saw there from earlier. But you can also manipulate age in the photos, which is a little eerie, but you can find a childhood version, for example, middle-age version, and old age, applying other lighting, color changes to the shot as well using the Gen AI. Finally, the last tab in the app allows you to see how many 3D images you've converted, 3D videos, as well as AI generations you've done. So it looks like there is a quota to some of these more advanced AI features using the large language model, Gen AI, which is not too surprising because some of these functions, like manipulating videos, photos, it seems to be more of a pro feature in Gemini and ChatGPT as well. So it looks like they give you a quota of around 1,000 images that you can convert into 3D, 20 videos into 3D video, and then 69 AI generations when you first get the frame. Perhaps it will renew in future months, or you can purchase more credits to top it up if you run out in between, and you can see some of those quotas over here displayed as coins, so just keep that in mind. Of course, it would be great if these were bundled into the frame, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be really the case with many of these AI type products, since they are using services like ChatGPT behind the scenes, which is based on volume of requests. ChatGPT or Google is also charging the company, and then of course they will be charging you as well. So just keep that in mind. Of course, if you're more light on some of these AI feature usage, primarily using it for just displaying photos or just converting normal 2D photos into 3D, since this quota, 1,000 images, seems to be more generous, I think you should be mostly fine. But if you're doing more of the actual Gen AI parts, just keep in mind this limitation. So there we have it. That is more or less it as far as our closer look at the kind of interesting, slightly unique MemoryCube 3D digital photo frame. Again, technically it's a hardware similar to an Android tablet with its own built-in battery that you can use detached as well, but it's been specially optimized for the photo frame functionality, allowing wireless sharing of photos over to the frame using the companion app, which by the way, you can also share the code with your friends and family. They just need to download the app on their phone as well if they want to send photos over to the frame remotely. For example, if you have grandparents living in a different city or country, they can still send it over, and vice versa, kind of similar to a Google Home Mini or Smart Assistant display. And the actual 3D effect is really not bad, I have to say. It does give you a nice sense of depth and additional immersiveness as it plays back slideshows when you're doing work. Perhaps a few missing features that they could add in a future software update or generation 2, perhaps integrating an optional voice assistant that you can turn on and off, could perhaps make it even more versatile and kind of replacing one of those other options, like an Echo Show, for example, or perhaps a YouTube app allowing you to watch some videos if you're using this in the kitchen, for example, while cooking, in addition to the other modes that we saw there from earlier. By the way, there is one more widget here that we kind of just skipped over, which is a music player app. It's relatively self-explanatory, but it does support cover art information as well, and you're able to jump through other tracks, playing back MP3s, WMAs, FLAC without too many issues, and it just uses the speakers there on the bottom, or you can connect to wireless Bluetooth, as we mentioned earlier, if you want to sync it up to even larger headphones. So it can also be used as a music player for some light entertainment purposes. So if you're interested in something like this, you can check out more details in the links down below. Overall, definitely a little bit more immersive and perhaps fun to play around with compared to a normal digital photo frame, and not bad for a first generation attempt. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the MemoryCube 3D AI photo frame.